Welcome to Breaking InDecision. Decisions can be hard, especially in a post-information world. Whether it's your phone, computer, internet, or frankly, just being bombarded by social media, information is literally everywhere. So how is it that we make good decisions? How is it that we know what decision we're making is the right one? Over the next coming weeks, we're going to explore exactly that with experts, knowledgeable professors, and the leaders in making or breaking InDecision.
Sometimes in life you say, how am I here right now with these amazing people? And I'm just totally honored to be here with you all.
That right there is me, your host, Kinsley Trigger Jordan, loving the conversation, surrounded by experts.
What we're looking at is this concept of the post-information age, where we're going really, and how we can help our decision makers.
Meet Yves Gagnon, always an incredible perspective and quick with a laugh.
About myself, U.S. Air Force. I've been in for 30 years. Most of my background has been in space operations.
Welcome Daniel Gottridge. If you're looking for attention to detail and incredible perspective, you've found him.
So I'm a cognitive psychologist, a French cognitive psychologist, as you can tell from the accent. So I'm interested basically in how people learn and make decisions.
And of course, our honored guest, Valérian Chambon, French psychologist and absolute genius. Join us today as we welcome Valérian Chambon.
When we first talked, I expressed to you sort of 5 or 6 questions, but we've drilled down a little bit better into those. So what I said to you initially was that we would be interested in your experience in decision making. We would be interested in the evolution of the amount of information we're having to cope with as humans, and whether or not that changes the way we make decisions. I'd said that we're interested in thoughts or reflections on what the post-information age is and how technology could help or hinder humans to make decisions, and then also the impact of those decisions. So this is sort of what we say as an opening discussion to everyone. But actually, as you know, we are speaking to all sorts of different people. So we are speaking to industry people trying to sell us machines. We're speaking to psychologists like yourselves, trying to give us a much more scientific view of the way our brains work. And we're speaking to military people with their experience on how they've coped through a life of making decisions. And we're hoping to get other people as well that will tell us not military decisions, but maybe medical decisions, maybe all that sort of stuff. So if we start, I think we had talked about the fact that the post-information era is unclear. A lot of people talk about it. We don't really know what that means. We don't really know where we're going. And you had talked to me about cognitive offloading. And I hope that this is perhaps a good place to start. Your thoughts on post-information age leading into your views on that particular topic.
Yeah, so first, it's, to me, we live in a world that is saturated with information, right? So, and the risk is to be overloaded with so much information that we cannot do anything anymore. So this is what we call in psychology choice paralysis, right? You're paralyzed in making choices. So the question that we have in cognitive science or psychology is, what happens when people are overloaded with information? How do they behave, for example? And what we observe is that very often the cognitive system, when it is overloaded, returns to its default mode. And the default mode is just, the automatic control mode, in which you produce more or less automatic habitual responses with less deliberation and perhaps more heuristics, right? So that's just a comment on informational overload in general. And now about cognitive offloading. So there are many functions and processes that we now delegate to external devices. So this is what we call cognitive offloading. And today, thanks to technology, or maybe because of technology, we have externalized, outsourced part of our cognition. So from the pen we use, to take notes and remember things, to our computer that we use to communicate as now, or to run programs, to read, write, or to calculate. So today, decision making, for example, it's true, it's very often assisted by technology that helps us to better decide or to make more informed decision. So now, perhaps the question is to acknowledge that decision making can be improved differently by technology, and the type of technology used will depend on what we want to improve in the decision-making process. So what we want to improve in the decision-making process, so it's an important question that we should ask, because so either you need, so in order to improve the decision-making process, so either you need more information, so you want to make a better informed decision or to reduce uncertainty in the decision-making process, or you need to update your model of the world, so the internal model you use to understand the world and to make predictions about the world. Or you need a new interpretation to make sense of a new fact. So you need to expand your model of the world. And of course, different technologies can be used depending on your current need, whether it is acquiring more information, updating your representations, expanding your model of the world. So this is what I could say, about the relationship between information and decision making today, and technology in general, because we are living in a very technological world today, and information is most of the time conveyed by technology.
You talked about both the machine side and the decision maker side, and obviously we come to you as members of the military, where we are talking about the next generation of fighter aircraft, definitely incorporating artificial intelligence into the cockpit, so pilots are more operating a system than necessarily flying a plane, which again may hurt the feelings of the pilot in the room, but
no, not at all.
But
be honest.
But this is not just happening in the military. We are seeing instances in the civilian sector of artificial intelligence coming into play with common everyday technologies such as self-driving cars. But there can be some difficulty with that as people get used to the idea of getting inside a car and maybe not having the control to be able to make the decisions necessarily that they're comfortable with, that they learned while they were learning how to drive. Can you talk about some of the difficulties that you see with people incorporating AI technology in something like an automatic driving car?
Yeah, that great question. That's a super interesting question. Actually, I could talk for ages about I'm going to talk forever about this.
That's good.
So this is one of our line of research. So acceptability in human-machine interaction. How do you accept decisions made by an artificial or automated system you're interacting with? So the question we have is, in our research group, in relation to what you're asking, is if we want to improve the quality of human-machine interactions, perhaps we should look at the science of human-human interactions, so social psychology or social cognition, for example. And in social cognition, we know a lot about what makes human-human or interpersonal interactions effective or enjoyable, or what makes people cooperate with each other. So perhaps we should just exploit this knowledge to improve human-machine interactions, in particular because, as you said, machines are becoming more and more complex, and they resemble more and more human agents. I mean, artificial intelligence is an occurrence of a super intelligent agent. And so this is what we try to do in the lab. So I can describe the type of experiments we run in the lab to address this question, if you want. So we have this experimental design in which participants interact with an artificial system, and the system is supposed to help the participants by providing recommendations on various things, like which direction to take, given some obstacles along the way. So the task is a very rough airplane piloting task. So it's not realistic at all, but it's not the point here. And the system, so that's the trick. The system sometimes explains its recommendations, either by showing what kind of information it uses to make its recommendation, so what information in the environment the system takes into account, or by communicating its confidence in its recommendation. So I'm 80% confident that the right direction is left, or I'm 45% confident that you should go up to higher altitude, for example. And then we look at participants' performance, but also at participants' acceptability. So to what extent they accept the system decisions or the system recommendation. And what we observe is that even if the system is not very efficient or not always very confident in its decisions, participants, they tend to prefer the system that explains itself. And they tend to come back to that system more, to re-engage with that system more than with the system that does not provide explanation for its decisions. So the question that we have is, why do people find artificial systems that explain themselves more acceptable? And the answer is, well, probably because when someone, whether a human agent or an artificial system, provides an explanation for its behavior, it helps your brain generate a prediction about what is going to happen next. And it helps you to conceive or to represent the future consequences of that behavior. And I think that's interesting because what our experiments show is that people are not always interested in doing the most effective actions possible. They're also interested in doing actions where they can understand the consequences and live with those consequences and be held accountable for those consequences. And so I don't know much about the military, but I think this has direct implications for the military, because think of the drone pilot, for example, so the guy who controls the drones remotely. Is he or she more interested in making the most efficient decision possible, like destroying the right target at the right time? Or is he or is she also interested in making decisions whose consequences he can understand and live with? And so can efficiency and acceptability be reconciled? So that's the kind of question that we try to address in our research on acceptability and human-machine interactions.
So if I may, I've got to follow on to this because, and we talked a little bit about it when we talked with each other. How are you finding the difference in, and I suspect it's not an age, I suspect it's more a mental state, but how are you finding the difference in generations? Now, of course, in the military, we're a very hierarchical organization. So generals are quite old, colonels are old, majors are semi young, and lieutenants are really young. Now,
the same in research,
Well, there you go. All right. So yes. So licence, masters, doctor. Yeah, okay. Wow. So how are you seeing coping with exactly that? Because I find it, so my own bias, I find it very difficult to find a little black box, trustworthy, transparent. I can find it reliable. I've got no problems with reliability. I've got no problems with consistency. I don't think I've got any problems with optimal capabilities of that black box. And when we talk, you gave me the example, of course, we do trust things that we don't know all the time. So somebody will come in, and I'm in the Air Force. If they're from the Navy and they tell me something about the Navy, I will immediately pretty much trust them. That's the same thing as a black box telling me something about the Navy, but I'll trust the Navy person more than I trust the black box. And I wonder if this is a generational thing, if this is just an Eve thing, if you're seeing difference, because part of our question, I guess, is how can we cope with information and decision making, but through through the ages of our people who tend to be younger at the bottom and older at the top?
That's an excellent question. And it's true that another dimension of acceptability is whether you're familiar or acquainted with the technology. And it's definitely a matter of a generation, of age, of course. So, yeah.
There's an
Yes.
example. It may help. I had a friend who he flies 5th gen aircraft, and he was top stick as far as top hands and foot pilot. I mean, he was the top going all the way through. And he had a very difficult time, very, very difficult time. Almost didn't make it through 5th gen aircraft training because it was not about the hands and feet for him. It was about how do you assimilate all of this data? You have all of the information right there at your fingertips. You have more information than he could process, and it wasn't about the hands and feet because to our point earlier, the aircraft was an altitude hold. It wasn't a bunch of yanking and banking. It was the fact of how do you make decisions and how do you attribute what information is valuable and what's not, because the machine was bringing everything he needed. But it was just a process internally, and that interface between the human and the machine, I think, is the point that when you said that, Yves, that's
Yes.
what came to mind is
Yes.
how do we smooth that process over?
Yes. So those are two different questions. The question of how do we accept information coming from the machine, recommendations coming from the machine, and how we prioritize or filter in information coming from artificial systems. And artificial systems, they provide us with tons of information that we have to filter. So I think, that's a very good question. Actually, video game designers, they have exactly the same problem. So I know a psychologist, she has been working on Fortnite, the famous video game. And in Fortnite, they have this problem that on the screen, when your character moves, it receives a lot of different information from the environment. And the question the psychologist had was how to chunk information so that information is easier to process for the player. And so she just applied, very basic Gestalt principle to chunk information in such a way that the brain is able to process like big amount of information. So you can apply very basic principles of like psychology of perception to help people deal with large amount of incoming information. So that we know how to do that, and that's almost an engineering problem more than a psychological problem, right? The question of acceptability, whether you accept the large amount of incoming information, is a psychological problem, however. And this is why we actually turn to social psychology to solve this problem, because this problem has been solved by human agents when they have to, cooperate with other agents. So this is exactly what social psychology is about. Finding what are the key determinants of trustworthiness among human agents.
That's incredibly interesting. So accepting the information is a psychology challenge.
Yes.
Prioritizing the information is more of an engineering. How do you present it? How do you identify what's more important? That's fascinating.
Yes, I would say so.
Thanks for joining us right here on Breaking InDecision with our special guest today, Valérian Chambon. If you'd like to join us for future episodes of Breaking InDecision, make sure you follow along on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, and anywhere podcasts are available. Join us next week as we bring more experts, professors, and industry leaders to help us decide what information we need, how to sort through it, how to prioritize it, so that we can make the best decisions possible. Thanks for joining us again, and follow along with the Trilateral Strategic Steering Group on LinkedIn. See you next week.